Good afternoon and welcome to our April 25th session of the OCWIC Speaker Series. My name is Julia Shimolinski and I'm the Career Development Officer for OCWIC. The OCWIC ACM-W professional chapter is a statewide community of women and men technology professionals from industry and academia dedicated to engaging and empowering Ohio women in computing by building community, celebrating success, and illuminating possibility. Today's session is part 2, Cultivating Authentic Self-Esteem, led by our very own Alex Macko-Millard of the OCWIC board. Before we get started, apologies for that. So before we get started, I do want to clarify that this is an educational session only, not a therapeutic or counseling session. There's no confidentiality or mental health services available through this session. However, most universities and mental health providers have counseling services available. And I do recommend that you refer to one of the mental health hotlines on the slide if you would like some additional support. Today, we're talking about understanding self-esteem. Not necessarily increasing, but instead we want to make sure we can help identify, appreciate, and cultivate self-esteem moments. So now let's get started. We're thrilled to welcome Alex Macko-Millard, but first I'm going to hand off to our OCWIC chapter president, Dr. Rochelle Christoph Hippler, for some opening remarks. Thank you, Rochelle.
So hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle Hippler. I am a professor at Baumwells University. And I'm thrilled to be here and to be a part of the series. Through my research, I found that although women and men feel similar in their competence, women's sense of worthiness drops their junior and senior years in computing fields. And this was something that I had observed over many, many years of teaching, 25 years of teaching in higher ed. And along with Chris's work in authentic self-esteem, I thought there's got to be something here. So with Chris, we created the Got Doubt, Staying Committed in Your STEM Major workshop. And working with women and men, actually, on this field, the field itself can sometimes feel a little chilly. And so I think this topic of authentic self-esteem really hits home and gives us something to think about and some way to kind of make sense of the world that we are working in. So could you advance to the next slide, please? So again, based on my study, here it is, right? That although the competence, sure, it drops a little bit when you get into your harder classes. That's the blue line there. But the red line is the worthiness. And that's the concern, right? Is when you're not feeling like, well, I can do the work, but I just don't feel like anyone's going to care if I'm here or that the work itself is worthy. And that's, if you see that there, this goes from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior to professional. See that right around that junior, senior year, which is about the time when sometimes women start really doubting whether or not they belong in computing and maybe even leave the field. And it's right about the time you're doing internships and trying to apply for jobs, and things can really feel like maybe I just don't belong here. The good news is that with the professionals, it does increase and it does come in balance back with the guys. And so my message to all the women who might be out there and guys maybe who might be doubting whether or not they belong in this field is to hang in there and think about a little bit more about this idea of cultivating your sense of competence, but also really paying attention to those moments of worthiness that can make you feel like you belong. Next slide. So a quick recap from what Dr. Mruk talked about in our first session is that if you think about worthiness and competence as a grid and a split here in the middle, that if you feel really, really worthy but not competent, you can become quite defensive. And then the opposite can happen too. Let's say you feel really competent but you don't feel like you belong, you can become defensive. And those two things end up happening quite a bit. As a teacher, I've identified that quite a bit within my classrooms. Either students who feel like, oh, I belong in here, but I'm failing, could be defensive in comments like, well, I don't have to answer that. You figure it out yourself, right? Because they don't have the answer, and they kind of aggressively want to push you away from having to expect them to answer the question. The other type of self-esteem, defensive self-esteem that I see happens often with the women that I work with. They're getting A's in their classes, brilliant computer scientists, but they're not volunteering for things. They're not volunteering answers. They're not being part of research groups. And that's what gets me worried, because that's the other type of defensive. You're not defensive in an aggressive way. You're defensive in a protective way. Please edit this out for a second. And so what's best is when we have both of those together, when we are feeling competent and worthy. That's when our authentic self-esteem kicks in. We're feeling good and we're doing good things, right? We're competently handling our CS life and the challenges that come that way in a worthy way. Next slide, please. And so I'll just wrap it up right here. If you would like to learn a little bit more about Dr. Mruk's work, there's a QR code there on the left. It'll take you right to his blog that he has published through APA, which is the Association for Psychology. And the QR code on the right is information about my Got Doubt workshop and survey. And if you have any questions about how to identify that within yourself, within your team, within your classrooms, just follow that QR code and I'll give you some information. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Alex.
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm so excited to be here today and to be sharing with all of you. I must admit that I am a little nervous. This is my first time giving a sort of talk like this, and I am very excited to just be diving into the topic of self-esteem and to be here as a representative, as a woman who is a computer scientist. So let's get into who I am, why I'm here, and about me. So I am an adult student at Baldwin-Wallace University. I'm a computer science major with a minor in communication studies. I have sort of a not so linear journey. So I started college as a computer science major. I left due to a health problem, and I worked as a software engineer and as a QA automation engineer for 5 years before I came back to Ohio and returned back to school at Baldwin-Wallace to finish off where I left off. So in those 5 years, while I was working as a quality assurance engineer and a software engineer, I worked in the fields of telecommunications and public safety. So I worked on different software that dealt with, just getting customers the proper, internet and phone services. And in public safety, I worked with law enforcement and emergency response teams to reduce the response times, from the moment you dial 911 and talk to the dispatcher to the moment that the emergency response personnel is arriving at your door. So it could be considered a sort of high stress area, but I felt, while I was out in the field, as Dr. Hippler kind of mentioned, that my competence and my confidence in my abilities definitely increased because I was out there and I saw, I have proof I can actually do it. I can get my work done. And I had, performance reviews to go off of. So right now, while I'm back in school, I am engaged in research. And I'm also engaged in a project called Mission Guatemala, which is headed by Dr. Rochelle Hippler. For Mission Guatemala, we work with a nonprofit clinic down in Guatemala to provide them with quality software to replace their paper records medical system. For the research that I do, I work with the MOPS, which is the Mobile and IoT for Planet and Society research group. And we do air quality sensing for historically redlined communities across northeastern Ohio. And I'm working on LoRa. LoRa is just a long-range, low-power alternative network to get real-time data from IoT sensors. I'm also working on Campus Plate. Campus Plate is an Android and iOS mobile application that's just used to reduce food insecurity and food waste on college campuses. So what we do is, instead of throwing out food, we take that food that's still good, we package it, and we put it in refrigerators across campus. And then students who, any student who has the app downloaded on their phone can go and get food for free. Because studies have been done that show many college students are food insecure. So this is the solution to that. Lastly, I'm active in ACM-W, both in my student chapter on campus at Baldwin Wallace as the president, and I'm also involved in the ACM-W OCWIC professional chapter on the board as the student chapter coordinator. So that is about me. Let's actually get into the content. So why is it important for us to even talk about self-esteem in the first place? I mean, we could just have, another technical talk about a certain technology, but I think it's important to talk about self-esteem because of these following reasons. Compared to men in tech, women are often less likely to apply for a job if we're missing one or more qualification, as opposed to our male counterparts who will apply even if they only meet maybe one of the qualifications or maybe none at all. Next, women are less likely to ask for a raise or negotiate during the hiring process. We are our own advocates, and a lot of women feel like, we're not meeting that worthiness. We're not worthy of asking for that raise or worthy of negotiating these, stipulations as we're accepting a job. Women are less likely to move up in leadership roles, maybe because we feel like we don't deserve it. Women are more likely to experience burnout. And then we're also more likely to leave the field of tech than our male counterparts. So these are important issues, and some of them, they are systemic, but some of them also, these reasons can, we can talk about a solution that comes from within too, and that is, the topic of self-esteem. So let's kind of dive into, what do we mean by self-esteem, and particularly authentic self-esteem? So if we look at the Oxford Dictionary, self-esteem is the good opinion of oneself, high self-regard. And I highlighted confidence in one's own worth and abilities. So again, there's that balance between competence and worthiness. And that's the Oxford Dictionary definition, kind of mixed a little bit with Dr. Mruk's definition. And I thought I would include next, this was on the slide from Dr. Mruk's PowerPoint in the first part of this discussion. He defines authentic self-esteem as the ability to competently face life's challenges in ways that are worthy of a mature, healthy person. So we know what self-esteem is. So what are the components of self-esteem? Well, the ways that we can go about building our authentic self-esteem are by nurturing our competence and our worthiness. So competence is defined as sufficiency of qualification. So that's the degree, that's the training, that's the certifications that you have, that's the grades that you get, that's the positive performance reviews that you get. Those are the presentations you make. That's what we mean by competence. And then worthiness, with reference to a person, his or her attributes, conduct, honor, dignity, nobility, worth, merit, and excellence. So worthiness is a feeling that comes from within, and that's what you get by, maybe doing the right thing, doing the thing that aligns with your morals and with your ethics, and therefore gives you that power from within. So moving on, what is the role of competence? Well, competence gives us the confidence to take on new and challenging but rewarding tasks. So as I mentioned before, going for the promotion, volunteering for the research group, taking on a new position, that's sort of a demonstration of competence. And the common sources of competence are achievements and influence. So let's think about that a little bit, and I'll provide you some personal examples as we move on. So smaller examples of competence building, and I like to think about the smaller and the bigger examples, the smaller particularly more because they add up and they're very important. So a smaller example of competence building is you're working in the code, you're working on a program, and you've managed to squash a bug that's really been bothering you for a while. I remember when I took on the responsibility of Mission Guatemala, I was very nervous and my competence was low. I did not very much, I was unsure. I was nervous. I didn't know how I would do with this. And I think after squashing my first bug, I thought, you know what? I can do this. Okay, I can keep going. And then you keep learning and you keep building on that. And those small little steps you take in the right direction help improve your competence. Another example is a mentoring session with a team member. So when I became product owner for Mission Guatemala, I was overseeing a team of people. I am overseeing a team of people, and I work with each of them. And, they have questions. We have a daily stand up and they talk about their blockers. And, just taking a moment to mentor someone and help them get past a blocker, and just seeing the light go off in their head. It helped me to A, feel more confident in my own ability, and B, increased my confidence in my ability to help others. So really, it's great to pull in others when we're honing our competence. Some larger examples of competence building are presenting research. So even this discussion that I'm having today is helping me hone my competence. And it's very much outside of my comfort zone, but I found that pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and seeing the rewards of that, that's really what builds the competence. Another larger example of competence building is being chosen for a leadership role. So if you're chosen, if you're given an offer for a promotion, or you're elected into a position of power, that's another huge proof of the fact that you are competent in what you do. So moving on, what are the pitfalls in cultivating competence? And it's important to think about the pitfalls because we can address them. We have the power in our minds to do what we can to hone our competence. So first of all, validation seeking and ego boosting. There is a major, major difference between validation seeking and cultivating competence. Validation seeking is, sort of fishing for compliments or, just feeling a bump in your competence, but it's very temporary. There's external versus internal validation. So external would be like awards and things like that. And internal validation would be you taking the time to acknowledge the fact that you did something that was proof of your own competence. There is temporary versus long-term validation, which I mentioned before, which may be a compliment from someone versus some sort of long-term validation like a raise, something that, long-term would be sticking with you. There's also the confirmation bias. So I know, many of you have probably heard of confirmation bias before, but basically what you do is you reinforce negative thoughts with negative experiences. So usually with confirmation bias is you're sort of lacking in scope. You see everything you've done wrong and you're missing all of the things that you've done right. So how we can overcome this pitfall is by learning to recognize the areas that you are succeeding in. Because when you're taking these risks to cultivate your competence, failure is inevitable. Failure is just a natural part of life. And what matters is how you respond to it. What matters is what you take from it, the lessons that you learn. And that's how you can take your failure and turn that into an experience where you're cultivating your competence. Going off the confirmation bias, there's also the negative thought cycles. So that's when you start catastrophizing, when you start thinking, oh boy, I don't know if I can do this. And, it means I'm going to have to leave this career, and it means I'm going to be a failure as a person, and I'm going to lose my house, and I'm not going to have a job. That's catastrophizing. So really, if you catastrophize so much, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're thinking so negatively that you're taking unconscious actions towards manifesting that negative outcome. So really what we need to do is redirect our thoughts. You could sit there and think, what if I fail? What if I mess up? What if everybody thinks I'm an idiot? But you could also think, what if I succeed? What if I do well? What if this ends up being an amazing opportunity that is a springboard for more and more possibilities in my life? So really just taking that time to be mindful and redirecting the thoughts is how you overcome the pitfalls of the negative thought cycles. So I'm going to open this up to you guys now that we've talked about competence. These are questions for reflection. So for any of you, you can either put it in chat or you could raise your hand and turn off your mic. So how do you typically respond to challenges or setbacks in relation to your sense of competence? And I will give you guys some time to speak.
And again, feel free to just come off of mute and contribute, or if you're more comfortable, feel free to add it to the chat and we can read that for you. Rochelle.
So thank you for your presentation, Alex. This is really cool stuff. And you're doing, and this is just a wonderful application of like hundreds of years of research on self-esteem. And it's so cool to see this applied to computer science. And so the first question has to do with responding to setbacks and competence. I guess I just always try to remember when something is a setback that I've accomplished things before. This is just temporary. This is a great opportunity to learn something. Okay, I made a mistake. What went wrong? How do I fix it? Just trusting and believing that I've overcome challenges in the past and I'll overcome this one as well.
That's good. Thank you for that, Rochelle.
Anyone else? Okay, no other updates in the chat, Alex.
Okay, we can move on to the next question then. What have you done to help others hone their confidence, their competence? What kind of feedback can you provide others to help them build their sense of competence?
All right, well, I'll jump in as an educator. It's my job to do this. I think probably the most important thing is something called scaffolding. And, where you teach a small concept, and once people get that, then you build on that concept and you review the other one, then you review those two, and then you build on that one, and then you review the other ones and you build on that one. So that there's always a point where everyone's kind of getting it, and then you challenge somebody with something that's new and different. And you get them used to being uncomfortable with not knowing that answer until they figure it out with lots of encouragement and support, right? And then you move on to the next thing. Maybe I personally do that with myself. When I have a really hard problem to tackle, I figure out what is the smallest thing I can do toward that. And then I start working on that. I'm like, okay, well, I got that done. Let me see if I can do something else. Maybe we do that with programming as well. If you're smart, you won't try to write the whole thing at one time. Just tackle a little piece of it at a time, see if you can get that to work. And then you try another thing.
yeah, I think providing feedback is just, it's so important, providing feedback to others, which is why I try, in my product owner role to just always provide feedback. When someone does a really good job on a task, saying, you know what, you killed it. You did great on this. There was a student who was particularly nervous to take on, a new feature, a reporting feature, and she did amazing on it. And, I made sure to tell her, and I could just see, the smile beaming on her face. And, I knew that that was a moment of competence for her, of her competence being built. And now I see her taking on more and more challenging tasks because of that. And I think it builds and builds, like you said, Dr. Hippler, the scaffolding, it builds on top of each other. It's a positive feedback loop of, you give the validation, you give the feedback, and then others respond to it. And, they feel confident to continue on and take on more risky or challenging things. So the last question I have here.
We have an answer in the chat too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So it's I have an example where a team member was super nervous with public speaking, but really wanted to improve. So I gave her some small audience opportunities to start. And eventually she was on a Q&A panel where 300 employees tuned in to hear her. So that's awesome.
Wow.
And I would also say everybody here is contributing by obviously listening and attentively, but being quiet, because I know it's lunch for most of us, listening attentively to Alex. So feedback also, guys. This is not a 3-person show. But yes, these are great examples. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The last question we have here is, can you recall a time when you felt truly competent and worthy? What factors contributed to that feeling?
Well, I think some of these times when we jump in to help somebody out, or whenever you're helping others, whether it's competence or worthiness, we're also doing something for ourselves too. That's usually not the reason we're doing it, but there's a certain point of feeling like, oh, I really helped that person. That makes me feel good. And so I guess I would challenge everyone on this call to think also about the projects that they work on. So we've been talking, Alex has been mentioning the Mission Guatemala project. And yeah, it is a software development project. But I think the most powerful part of it for me is being executive product owner over the project, is just seeing how everybody feels that they are doing something really good for a worthy reason. So it's adding both of those pieces together. It's not just the fact that you can crank out some code. It's that we are building a solution that's going to improve the healthcare of the Maya in Guatemala. That is a big deal. And so I challenge everyone who's listening, in your work, we tend to really focus on the competency part of it. I can crank out 20 lines of Java in 10 minutes. Okay, great. But what's the point, right? If you can think about, and also I'm going to help reunite lost puppies with their owners, right? That can kind of remind you of your purpose, and again, help boost that competence and worthiness piece and get you into that authentic self-esteem quadrant.
I think for me, the factors that contributed definitely were like the feedback from others, first of all. And then second of all, I think just having my personal successes. So meeting those small little milestones, like squashing my first bug, definitely contributed to that feeling of competence and worthiness. So if anyone doesn't have anything to say, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So let's talk about the role of worthiness in building authentic self-esteem. So feelings of worthiness contribute to a genuine sense of self-worth, which is essential for personal and professional growth. So what are the common sources of worthiness? They are feeling accepted and doing the right thing. So a lot of women in the field of computer science struggle with the feeling of acceptance because we are in the minority. But we'll get to that when we get to the pitfalls in the next slide. But let's get to the smaller and larger examples of reinforcing worthiness. So some smaller examples, again, the smaller examples, they add up over time. Being invited to a social gathering by peers. So when I returned back to school, I was a non-traditional student. I'm an adult now, I'm married. And a lot of my classmates, are 18, 19 years old, and they're still, coming into their own. So I felt worried that I wouldn't fit in, that I would stick out like a sore thumb, and that I wouldn't be included in social groups. But, I found that, I've been invited to study groups, and I've been invited to go to social gatherings with my peers. And that really raised my sense of worthiness because I was being included. And it felt really good. And another small example of reinforcing worthiness, just me personally, I struggle with depression. And some days it's really hard to get out of bed and just do the things that I need to do, my responsibilities. So the days when I overcome my mood and I get out of bed and I manage to still be productive, I really give myself credit for that. Anybody could think like, oh, you got out of bed, that's not a big deal. But for me, it is a big deal. There's a lot of effort that goes into that. There's a lot of effort that goes into not hiding from my day and not hiding from my responsibilities. And overcoming that mood, it just proves to myself that I am worthy of this. I've put in the time. I've showed up in spite of all the obstacles that I faced along the way. Some larger examples of reinforcing worthiness. The first one was finding a mentor. That was just a huge thing for me. I had been looking for a mentor. I really wanted a mentor who was another woman in computer science or in a computing field. And I ended up finding Dr. Rochelle Hippler. And the fact that she has accepted me in spite of my neurodivergence, and she understands my quirks and we get along great, that was just a huge boost to my own personal worthiness. Just knowing that I have a mentor who I can go to and ask questions if I feel lost, if I feel concerned about something, and just being the first person in my family to go to college and to pursue a field like computer science. There's a lot I don't know in the realm of academia. There's no one I could really ask my questions to. So having Dr. Hippler there to, ask questions about academia, especially as I'm planning to move on to grad school, just asking grad school questions. That was a huge boost in my worthiness, just knowing that I have someone to go to that I can ask questions. And then the other larger example of reinforcing worthiness I have is contributing meaningfully to an important cause. So this really is, you have to take a look at your moral compass. You have to take a look at your ethics. What is important to you? What causes drive you and push you forward? And do what you can to be a part of that cause. So for me, advancing diversity in the field of computer science is very important. It's very relevant because I am a minority in the field of computer science. So that's why I took the steps to join the ACM chapter at my college campus. And that's why I took steps to join the OCWIC chapter. And I was so excited to be invited to that because it is part of my core values. So when you align yourself with those core values, that's when you find yourself expanding your feelings of worthiness and nurturing that feeling of worthiness. So what are the pitfalls in cultivating worthiness? I think a really big one that a lot of us face is invalidating compliments. So someone pays you a compliment and says, you did really great at that presentation. And then in your mind, you think, oh, that person's just being nice. They don't actually mean it. That's invalidating a compliment. And that's something we really need to get away from. Again, as I said earlier, with catastrophizing, when you think, what if something goes wrong? We'll think also, what if it goes right? And it's the same thing with the compliments. You could say, okay, I don't believe them. They're just trying to be nice. You could also say, but what if they genuinely mean it? You have to have that dialogue with yourself in your mind, and just become more mindful and aware of the way you frame compliments and the feedback that people give you. Because they could give you all the feedback in the world, but if you don't believe it, it's not going to help you cultivate your worthiness and your competence. Another thing that you could do, that's a pitfall in cultivating worthiness, is isolating yourself from your support system. And as someone who struggles with depression, I know what it's like to sort of isolate myself from my social system, my support system. You get stuck in your head, first of all, and you get stuck in those negative thought loops that I mentioned before. And what you really need to do to get over this pitfall is to break the ice and reach out. And it's hard when you have depression, but all it takes is a single email, a single message, to someone that cares deeply about you. And I can guarantee that everybody on this call has someone that cares about them enough to where you can share these problems that you're dealing with. Break the ice, reach out. And if you don't have someone that you feel like you can share these issues with, as Julia mentioned, a lot of campuses offer therapy, and just get out of your head and get someone to talk to. And it'll really help you sort of figure out what are your negative thoughts, and it'll help you figure out how can you reframe those. So another pitfall to cultivating worthiness is rejecting opportunities for growth. When you start to feel complacent, when you think, oh, I'm fine, I don't need to grow anymore, I don't need to expand, which is the wrong frame of mind to be in when you're in a field like computing and things are constantly changing and there's new technologies coming out. You don't want to be complacent. You want to be moving with the field. So while you're also taking on new opportunities, you want to be able to balance those new opportunities with your existing responsibilities. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself, but you do want to dedicate time to your growth. You don't just want to be complacent, because if you're complacent, that kind of means that your sense of worthiness might start decreasing over time. Another thing is catastrophizing failure, which I mentioned before. That's just, if this bad thing happens, it's going to lead to this bad thing, which is going to lead to this bad thing, the whole world is just going to blow up, which is not the case often. So what you need to do is give yourself permission to fail. And I mentioned before that failure is an inevitable part of life. And if you are focused on growth, if you are focused on honing your competence and your worthiness, it is inevitable that you are going to fail, and you need to accept that. You need to give yourself permission to fail. It's okay. Life will go on. And I know it's easier to say than to do, but these are things that you need to keep in the back of your mind as you navigate through life, that it's okay to fail. And to also give yourself credit when you succeed. Again, we sometimes we focus so much on our failures that we forget the areas that we are really succeeding and doing well in. I think the last pitfall in cultivating our worthiness is perfectionism. I have struggled with perfectionism my whole life. When you have these super high standards, you're just setting yourself up for failure. If you don't do everything absolutely perfect, then it's a failure. And then you start catastrophizing, and then you get stuck in the negative thought cycles. We really need to think about perfectionism. I think perfectionism often leads to overthinking and analysis paralysis. I've heard that term a lot, but you get stuck. You don't make any movement because you're standing there thinking how this could be absolutely perfect. And if you do anything Not like that, then it's going to be a failure. So again, you can thank your perfectionism for being there. It's a defense mechanism. You could say, thank you. I appreciate you trying to protect me, but I'm taking steps forward and I'm trying to grow. And I'm giving myself permission to fail. It's okay if it's not absolutely perfect on my first try. And leverage those mentors, leverage those people around you who can give you advice and continue to move forward. So as we did with the competence, I do have questions for reflection related to worthiness. So the first question is, how do you typically respond to compliments or expressions of appreciation from others? And I'll give you guys a moment to respond.
Again, feel free to come off of mute and contribute or add into the chat. Also, I did add the resources that we had shared on a slide earlier in the chat if you would like those for reference.
All right, so I'll jump in on that first one there, Alex, but I'm like you. Compliments, I usually flip them off. Like, oh, yeah, okay, thank you. And then I move on and don't even really think about it. But, as you mentioned, and as Dr. Mruk mentions in his research, is that, when those things come our way, we really need to savor them. We really need to sit and think and say, hey, that was pretty good. All right, that was pretty nice. Maybe it wasn't my standard of perfect, which is completely impossible to reach, but it was good enough, and it was probably even better than good enough because somebody said so.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat.
Okay. We can move on to the next question then. What self-care rituals might you engage in if you're having feelings of unworthiness? I like this question. I think you guys might have some interesting answers.
Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I'll jump in with a comment. So for instance, let's say somebody had asked me to speak and all of a sudden I start getting a little bit nervous before this talk, and I'm looking out at these brilliant, smart people who are out there, and I'm wondering, why do you want to hear from me? That's an unworthiness type of reaction. I just try to remind myself, hey, somebody asked you to talk, so own it. Somebody asked you to talk, so own it. Get up there, take the mic, do your thing. You've been asked to do this. And savor the moment that somebody asked you, instead of worrying about all these catastrophe and, oh, they were just being nice and all that silly stuff that goes through our head. Alex, what do you do?
I have very elaborate self-care rituals. Some of them are, doing yoga. Meditation is very important to me. Meditation, I try to take at least 10 minutes a day, right before I go to bed, to just sit there and reflect on my day, reflect on the peaks, reflect on the valleys. And especially if I'm feeling particularly unworthy, I try to focus on the positive things that went on in my day, that sort of reinforce my feelings of worthiness. So for example, I was having a day and maybe I got a not so good grade on something, and I was feeling unworthy or incompetent, and someone else gave me feedback and it was very positive. Well, I focus on that feedback, and you take the good with the bad. And not only, just the bad, it's during the meditation, I also think, okay, this thing kind of sucked. But what can I do to improve going forward? What can I do to take this loss and turn it into a win. So, okay, maybe I got, a C or a B or something on a test, and I really wanted an A. Then I could take that test, study, look at the things that I got wrong, and then on the next cumulative exam, I really kill those areas that I struggled in the first place. There's also self-care rituals like yoga, and sometimes I just need to disconnect from screen time altogether. I don't know about you guys, but sitting in front of a computer all day can sometimes take a toll on you. Um, and I just feel, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to work on this project. So just getting away from the screen and just like going for a walk, touching grass, going outside. That's another self-care thing that you can do.
No disconnecting for at least 10 minutes. We're going till 1. Just saying. You cannot disconnect from screen time right now. Afterwards, if you would like, that's fine, but not for at least these 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's not the plan, to disconnect right now. Okay, so let's move on to the next 2 questions. What have you done to help others feel worthy? And how can we cultivate a culture of worthiness in our schools and workplaces? Please chime in if any of you have any sort of answers to these questions.
Well, I know what while others are pondering, I am, unlike our lovely other co-hosts here, I am not in academia. I live in the industry space, and I have found that it's weird, but sometimes taking some of the corporate speak and turning it into a version for people actually sort of works, because some of the corporate logos and things actually do make sense, and they're much more applicable than we thought. One that comes to mind is the idea that better beats best. And we used to say that around offices all the time. And it was the kind of thing that you're thinking, how does that make sense? But when you think you're the best, you're also static. You're not striving to improve. You've achieved a level, and that is now your average. But if you're continuously doing better, no matter what your baseline was, whether it was top of your skill or bottom of your skill, if you're continuously striving to do better, you keep growing. And that has its own worth in it. And it's an entirely cheesy logo, and I get that. But sometimes it helps, particularly for those of us who live in the academia space or live in the industry space, not in the academia space. And we hear this stuff all the time, and you think you're applying it to like this massive corporation, but maybe internalize it and see how it actually applies to you, because shouldn't we all feel frankly more worthy than the company gets to feel? Like, we're individuals, we're people. We made this.
Yeah,
right. And I think actually the second bullet and the third bullet kind of go together. So that is another thing when I'm starting to feel unworthy. Maybe I just for some reason had a bad day teaching, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that was the worst lesson. That was the worst lecture I ever gave. And just starting to think like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And, that unworthiness, that doubt kind of sneaks in. But then, jumping back in, getting into another class, getting in with the students, offering some suggestions or something that may help them along, just reminds you like, okay, yeah, that was just one bad situation, keep on going. So I think that when we pay it forward, right, when we help each other feel worthy, when we give people compliments, that can really help. And then it ties into the last one about the culture of worthiness in your school and workplace. Sometimes our environment can feel a little chilly. Maybe there are a lot of people who are maybe a lot more introverted, maybe you're a little bit more extroverted, or you're more of a warm person, and you're sitting in a classroom with people who won't even look at you, right? There are some things that you can kind of maybe start to do that'll start to make you feel better, that can warm up that room, right? Inviting people to study with you, Recognizing was, when somebody had asked a good question, and inviting them to, be parts of other groups that you're in, and maybe they'll pay that forward to somebody else.
Makes sense. Anybody else have anything?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. So just to wrap everything up, in summary, self-esteem and its components impact every part of our lives. It impacts our personal lives. It impacts the way we think about ourselves. It impacts our careers, our academic lives. It really runs, it gets into everything. And we can cultivate authentic self-esteem through nurturing feelings of competence and worthiness. Again, competence gives us confidence to reach our full potential. And common sources of competence are personal achievements and influencing or impacting others in a meaningful way. And worthiness gives us the ability to bounce back from any of life's challenges and to continue growing in spite of adversity. Common sources of worthiness are acceptance and doing the right thing. And we can surpass the pitfalls associated with competence and worthiness by practicing mindfulness and awareness in the way we talk to ourselves and in the way we talk to others as well. So again, I just want to thank you all for attending today and listening to me, giving me a platform to speak on. I was nervous, but you all, you had a great conversation going and you were all respectful. So again, thank you for being here, and I hope you were able to learn something today.
Thank you, Alex. And for anyone else who is looking for a community or looking for a mentor, I encourage you to join your ACM-W community. If you don't have ACM-W at your school, join the professional chapter. We are all members of this chapter. We give each other lots of opportunities like this to grow and support each other as we make it through kind of this difficult world of tech that we all live in. So just a little plug for ACM-W, guys. So yeah.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining, and please join me in thanking Alex and Rochelle for your contributions today. Thank you everybody for attending. A recording of this session will be available on the OCWIC website. And thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.